All right, good evening. It's a pleasure to be with you under these circumstances. So I have 4 pieces to share with you about this week's Parsha. This week's Parsha is the double portion, VaYakhel-Pekudei, and also the special portion of Parshas HaChodesh, and we'll discuss that. So I get a lot of questions about observing Shabbos. Is a certain action permitted or prohibited? And I get a lot of these questions, and they come in great variety. And a lot of them have a similar answer. And the answer is that the specific action that the person is asking about, it doesn't violate any specific prohibition, but it's not in the spirit of Shabbos. And there are many, many examples of such behaviors, and I hesitate to mention them because they relate to often how we spend our time on Shabbos. I don't want to say anything that embarrasses anybody about this or that activity, but many such examples where the question that is asked, that's the answer. It doesn't violate anything specific, but it's not in the spirit of Shabbos. And I always sense, maybe it's just me, but I always sense that when I give that answer, the listener is not really satisfied. I always sense that the listener hears, it's not really prohibited, just don't do it because I say so. To the extent that that is the reaction to this answer, there is a crucial lesson that comes from the beginning of this week's Torah portion. The Parsha begins as follows. VaYakhel Moshe es kol hadas b'nei Yisrael, and Moshe gathered together the entire congregation of Israel. Vayomer alehem, and Moshe said to them, Eile hadvarim asher tziva Hashem la'asos osam. These are the words that God commanded to do them. So this is the opening pasuk. This is the grand project of the Mishkan, of the sanctuary. Now, we already learned a couple of weeks ago, Parsha Truma, Parsha Tetzaveh. We learned what it is. We learned the description. We learned all the details. We discussed some of the details. And here, after we know what it is, here Hashem commands, okay, now you know what it is, go and build it. That's the first pasuk. But the second pasuk, the pasuk directly after this, says, Sheishes yamim ta'aseh melacha, 6 days you should do your work. V'vayom hashvi yiyeh lechem Shabbos Shabboson l'Hashem. But on the 7th day should be a day of rest to Hashem. Now, that's very strange as the second pasuk, because we already know about the laws of Shabbos. We learned about the laws of Shabbos a few weeks ago in the Parsha of Yisro. We learned about the laws of Shabbos a week before that in the Parsha of Bashalach. There are several other places in the Torah that teach us about the observance of Shabbos. Why is it that here, at the beginning of VaYakhel, as the first line introducing the building of the Mishkan, does it start with a warning about observing Shabbos? So Rashi gives an answer that many of us are familiar with. Rashi says, you might think that the building of the Mishkan is so important that it takes precedence over Shabbos, and therefore the building should continue even on Shabbos. And therefore Rashi says, the pasuk here comes to teach you, she'eino doches Shabbos. It does not take over Shabbos, meaning you have to build the Mishkan 6 days a week, but on Shabbos you still have to rest. No work on the Mishkan can be done on Shabbos. Okay, that's one answer. I'd like to share a deeper answer, and it goes like this. The purpose of the rules and the limitations on Shabbos is not simply to rest, to sleep. The purpose of the limitations on our behavior on Shabbos is to free us of some commitments in order to give us the time and the opportunity to experience God more closely, more intimately than it is possible to do during the busy week. And therefore, we set aside certain behaviors in order to be able to concentrate on those behaviors that bring us closer to God. Prayer, study, spending time with our family, spending time with our friends, our community. And that goal of Shabbos is precisely the same goal as the Mishkan itself, to achieve closeness with God in the Mishkan. The purpose of the Mishkan is not just building it. The purpose and goal of the Mishkan is not just the details and the dimensions and the materials. Those are tools, not the goal, not the purpose. The goal and purpose of the Mishkan is expressed at the end of the Parsha, where the Torah says, Uchvod Hashem Maleas HaMishkan. The glory of God filled the Mishkan. There was an intimacy, there was a closeness between God and the Jewish people. And this connection between the goal of Shabbos and the goal of the Mishkan is expressed overtly by many, but perhaps most eloquently by Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel in his magnificent work, The Sabbath, where he explains that the Shabbos is a phenomenon in time equal to the Mishkan, which is a phenomenon in space. Both of them are intended to lead us to holiness and to intimacy with God. In other words, if we had the Shabbos the way it was supposed to be, we wouldn't need the Mishkan. And when we no longer have the Mishkan, or the Beis HaMikdash, the Holy Temple in Yerushalayim, we still have the vehicle of Shabbos to help us achieve the same purpose. So therefore, acting in the spirit of Shabbos, which means acting in a way that is conducive to holiness, acting in a way that contributes to holiness, is not less important than the rules and the limits. It is, in fact, the goal of all of those other rules. You know, it's very common that we greet each other on Shabbos. Some of us say Shabbat Shalom, have a Shabbos of peace. Some of us say Good Shabbos, have a good Shabbos. Recently, I was speaking to a friend of mine on a Friday afternoon. We finished our conversation and he said to me, have a holy Shabbos. But that's really what Shabbos is about. And that is the answer to this category of question that so many people ask with so many examples in so many different ways. The answer is a certain behavior okay on Shabbos or not? Even if it's not covered by a specific paragraph in the Code of Jewish Law. The answer is, does it lead to more holiness or less holiness? Does it bring you closer to God or further away from God? That's what Shabbos is supposed to be. Of course, this aspect of Shabbos is much harder to teach. It's much easier to teach the rules, permitted, prohibited. Rabbi Yosef Soloveitchik, the Rav, is famous for having said in the 1950s, he said, I can teach my students Talmud. I can teach them the most abstract, advanced concepts of Jewish law. They are very smart and they understand what I'm teaching. But it is much harder to convey the atmosphere we had in our home or the emotion my mother experienced when she was praying. That is one of the primary challenges that we have today, to develop a sensitivity to that emotion, to that atmosphere, to that feeling of Shabbos. And I will just share with you that necessity is especially true now. Now, when we do not have the normal accoutrement to Shabbos, we have Shabbos without shul, Shabbos without a minyan, Shabbos without Torah reading, Shabbos without community, Shabbos without a kiddush. It's much harder to be able to create an atmosphere and a feeling of Shabbos. And that needs, therefore, to be the focus of our effort, especially this Shabbos. Make it holy. Make it an opportunity to come closer to God. Because that's a lesson that derives from the first two psukim, the first two verses of this week's Parsha. A little later, the Torah describes how the entire Jewish people brought their offerings of materials with which to build the Mishkan. And they brought gold and silver, and they brought cloth and fibers, and all the materials that were necessary. And then finally, at the end of that section, the Torah says, the Hanasiim, and the Nasiim, a Nasi, which literally means prince, was the head of each tribe. Each tribe had a Nasi, who was the leader or the head of the tribe. The Hanasiim and the princes, Heviu es Avnei HaShoham. They brought the stones of Shoham. Of course, you know, the late Rabbi Shoham of blessed memory, but his name itself is a jewel. Not only he personally, but even his name. The Avnei Shoham, the stones of Shoham, were two stones that were placed on the garment of the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. And our rabbis explain the reason that they brought the Avnei Shoham is because they made the following offer, which sounds like a great offer. Anybody who raises funds would love to hear this offer. The Nesiim said, when Moshe called for offerings of these materials, the Nesiim said, we'll stand back, we'll let the people contribute, and after everyone has contributed, we'll make up the deficit, no matter how large it is. Could you imagine what our organizations would be like if we had donors like that? But our rabbis say that was not the right thing. Our rabbis say that it would have been proper for the Nesiim, the leaders, to lead by giving, to be the first to give. And therefore, our rabbis say that because the princes were lacking in their alacrity and enthusiasm to perform this mitzvah, if you look in the text of the Torah, we have a chance to look in the Chumash, you'll notice there's what appears to be an error in the word. Vahanasiim is missing a letter. Normally, the word Nasiim is spelled Nun, Sin, Yud, Aleph, Mem. I'm sorry. Nun, Sin, Aleph, Yud, Mem. But in the text of the Torah, in this verse, it's missing a letter. It's missing the letter Yud. And our rabbis tell us because the princes were lacking in how they should have volunteered to offer to support the Mishkan, their name is lacking a letter. And we learn from this the destructive trait that this engenders, because here we are more than 3,000 years later, and we're still reading this pasuk, and we're still reminding ourselves of this lesson that the Nesiim did not do the right thing by hesitating and waiting to the end. So I want to share with you a story. The story is told by Rabbi Yoel Sirkus, known to us as the Bach, one of the great classic commentators to the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law. He was a great legal scholar, lived several hundred years ago, and he told the following story about two acquaintances that he had. Story goes like this. There was once a poor man who approached a wealthy man with a request. The poor man wanted to be able to rent a property from a non-Jewish nobleman, to use this property as an inn to make a living for himself. And the wealthy man was friendly with the non-Jewish nobleman. So he thought if the wealthy friend would just ask the non-Jewish nobleman to lease him the property, the inn, he would do it. He would be able to earn a living for himself. And the wealthy man agreed. He said, please excuse me, I'm on my way out of town. I'll be away for 2 days. As soon as I get back, I'll go to the nobleman and ask him and fulfill your request. And the poor man was very appreciative. Thank you very much. The wealthy man came back 2 days later. He went to the non-Jewish nobleman. The non-Jewish nobleman agreed to the request. The poor man was able to rent the inn, and the poor man was able to support himself and earn a living from this inn. Many years later, when the wealthy man had passed away, the Bach, Rabbi Sirkis, had a dream. And the wealthy man came to him in a dream and told him what happened to him, the wealthy man, when he died. And here's the story that he told. He said his soul came before God to be judged. He had done many mitzvos in his lifetime, and he was judged by the heavenly court that he was entitled, he had earned a share in Olam Haba, in the world to come. So, as he was about to enter Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, the world to come, the Malach, the angel that had been created from his mitzvah of helping the poor man to be able to earn a living, that angel blocked his way. The man said, "Why are you blocking my way?" And the angel said, "Because, yes, it's true, you did a very good mitzvah. You helped this man to be able to support himself. But you made him wait 2 days. And for those 2 days, he was worrying, he was anxious, he didn't know how he would be able to support himself. And because you delayed 2 days, even though in the end you did it, you are going to be delayed for 2 days before you enter Olam Haba, your reward in the world to come." And Rabbi Sirkis woke up frightened, and he gathered his entire community the next day, and he told them this story. Don't ever delay. When you have the opportunity to do a mitzvah, do it right away with alacrity, with enthusiasm. Do not delay, because we are held accountable not only for doing what is wrong, God forbid, but even for doing what is right when we do it in a lazy manner. And the truth is, you see from the Torah that the Nesiim themselves learned their lesson, because while they were last to offer to donate to the building of the Mishkan, when the building was complete and it was time to dedicate the Mishkan, we learn later in the Torah, Parshas Naso, they were the first. They were the first to offer gifts to inaugurate the dedication of the Mishkan. They learned that lesson. And that lesson, in fact, is the difference between chametz and matzah. What's the difference between chametz and matzah? Both of them are a mixture of flour and water made into a dough and baked. The difference is matzah is flour and water that is mixed and is put into the oven within 18 minutes. If more than 18 minutes pass, the dough starts its process of rising. That's bread. That's prohibited. This coming Shabbos, if we were in shul, which unfortunately we're not going to be, we would have the opportunity to read the fourth of 4 special portions, Parshas HaChodesh. And by the way, even if we're going to be at home, you should take the opportunity to study the weekly Torah portion and to study this special portion. And in that portion, we have the following verse. This is back in Parshas Bo. The Torah says, Ushmartem es hamatzos, guard the matzos. That is an obligation to make sure that the dough that we bake does not turn into chametz, it stays matzah. That's the source of the phrase shmura matzah. Shmura matzah means guarded matzah. It means matzah where the flour has been guarded and protected from the time it was harvested to make sure that it never came into contact with any moisture, so that there should be no possibility of any type of fermentation or rising when it's finally baked. That's shmura matzah. Says Rashi, based on the Medrash, that this is not only a lesson about matzah, it's a universal lesson, because the word matzos, mem, sadi, vav, taf, has the same letters with different vowels as the word mitzvos, mem, sadi, vav, taf, mitzvos, which means commandments. And Rashi says, quoting the Medrash, Kederech she'ein machmisen et hamatzos, just like we are not allowed to delay in creating matzah, because if we mix the flour and water and we delay, we're not acting quickly, but we allow more than 18 minutes to pass, it turns into chametz. Just like we're not allowed to delay when it comes to baking the matzah, kach she'ein machmitzin es ha-mitzvos. We must have the same attitude for all of the mitzvos that we perform, to do it as quickly as possible, with alacrity, with enthusiasm, not being lazy, not delaying whenever it's possible. Ella, but rather, in bali yadcha, if the opportunity to perform a mitzvah comes to your hand, aseh osa miyad, do it right away. That's the lesson of the difference between chametz and matzah, and that's the lesson that we learn from the mistake of the Nesiim and the lesson that they learned. A couple of years ago, I read in the New York Times an article. I will confess to you, I took it a little bit personally. But as soon as I read this article, I thought of the following Dvar Torah that I want to share. So, since 1678, it's a long time ago, in the town of High Wycombe, which is a town outside of London, and the same thing happens in a number of other places in Europe, but High Wycombe is one of the places. Every May, there is an event, an annual event that takes place, an annual weigh-in of the mayor and the town officials. And what happens is, everyone gathers in the square of this town, and it happens this year, ongoing, and it's happened every year since 1678. On this day in May, the mayor and the other town officials are gathered, everyone gathers in the town square, and the mayor and the town officials are seated on a large brass scale in the middle of the square with everyone watching. And they are weighed to see whether they are the same weight as last year, or less than last year, or more than last year. And the reason for that is because in 1678, there was an incident with a mayor who was corrupt and who took money from the public trough and enriched himself, and the townspeople were very, very upset. And he gained weight through his gluttony, eating and drinking what he had stolen from the town. And so they instituted this annual event where once a year, the officials are weighed to see if maybe they also have taken a little bit more from the public than they should have, and maybe they have enriched and enlarged themselves. Okay, that's an event that happens every May since 1678. When I read the article, first of all, I thought about what would happen to me in such a ceremony. But then I thought about the following Dvar Torah. The Torah says, V'haya kitzeis Moshe el ha'ohel, and it was when Moshe left the tent of meeting, the Mishkan, to walk back to his own tent, Yakumu kol ha'am, everyone would stand up, seemingly out of respect. Moshe is passing by, everyone stands up. V'nitzvu ish pesach ohalo, and everyone would stand at the entrance to their tent, standing. V'hibitu acharei Moshe ad bo ha'ohalo, and they would stand and watch Moshe walk from the Mishkan back to his own tent. Sounds like an act of respect. But the Medrash says a fascinating comment. The Medrash says that one time Moshe was doing this walk. Shama, Moshe heard some people muttering. V'haya Shama leitzanei hadar. He heard the leitzanim of the generation. A letz is a person who is a scoffer, a cynic, a person who always can be counted on to make an inappropriate comment. If you're in a place where everyone is standing respectfully and solemnly, and one person makes some kind of inappropriate joke, that's a letz. Shama leitzanei hadar. Moshe heard a couple of leitzanim along the side as he was walking by, and they were muttering to each other about Moshe. And one of them said about Moshe, watching him walk by, looks like he put on a little weight, Moshe. And the other one said, well, with all of the donations of gold and silver and copper that are coming in to build the Mishkan, probably he kept a little bit for himself. And therefore, that's why he looks a little heavier, a little bit more prosperous, because he skimmed a little off the top. The Medrash continues, Kishashama Moshe kach. When Moshe heard these mutterings on the side, Amalei, he said to himself, Nigmar ha-Mishkan, as soon as this work of building the Mishkan is complete, Etein lochem cheshbon, I will give you a full accounting of every coin, every ounce of material that was collected. And that is the meaning of the first verse of the second Parsha that we read this week. We read VaYakhel-Pekudei. The first verse of Pekudei is, Ele Pekudei HaMishkan. This is the accounting of the Mishkan. Mishkan ho'edus asher pukad al pi Moshe. The accounting of all of the material that was gathered at the instruction of Moshe. And then the Torah goes on to describe the detailed amounts of how much gold was collected, how much silver was collected, how much copper, etc. In other words, the reason the Torah has this accounting is so that Moshe could be transparent, because he heard people rumbling, maybe he had taken a little bit for himself. So this Mishnah, this Medrash, has two very important and very practical lessons. The first lesson is, no matter how good you are, no matter how right you are, if you act in public, there will always be a letz to criticize you. There is no person in the world about whom this accusation is more ludicrous, literally, than Moshe. Because God himself says in the Torah, B'chol beisi ne'emanhu, Moshe is trusted in my entire house. Moshe is the most trusted of men. God himself is saying that. Now, that doesn't mean that anybody who criticizes you is a letz. Whenever you're criticized, whenever I'm criticized, even if it is by a letz, even if it is in an inappropriate manner, we should still consider the words. We should still rethink our own behavior. Maybe there's something to learn. Maybe there's something to correct, even if it was not said in a nice way. But being right does not insulate you from criticism from a letz. And therefore, the first lesson is expect it. Don't get too frustrated by it. Even Moshe had to deal with it. I wish I had heard this Dvar Torah 36 years ago when I started my career. Here's the second lesson. The second lesson is a point made by Dr. Meir Tamari. And he says, pay attention to how Moshe does not respond to this ridiculous accusation. Because what Moshe could have said, hearing this mumbling that was so inappropriate, he could have said, how dare you? I'm Moshe Rabbeinu. God himself said, B'chol beisi ne'eman, how dare you question and think that I took something wrong? But rather, that's not how Moshe responds. Rather, he ignores the motivation of the criticism and he responds to its substance. Pekudei hamishkan. You have a right to a full accounting, he says to the Jewish people. I could have made a mistake. No one is so perfect that they are unable to make a mistake. And here is the audit. And notice also, the Medrash Tanchuma points this out. The Torah does not say that the accounting was made by Moshe. The Torah does not say, Asher Pokad Moshe. This is the accounting of the material that was collected, the accounting that was done by Moshe. No. The accounting was done Asher Pukad al Pi Moshe. The accounting was done at the instruction of Moshe by others. It was an outside audit. Moshe teaches the importance not just of avoiding impropriety, but the importance of avoiding even the appearance of impropriety. And if that was true for Moshe, where after all, God himself did say, B'chol beisi ne'emanhu, he is the most trustworthy of all people, how much more so for ourselves? If you work, I work, in any public task, it is important that you act to engender trust of others. And that means to respond even to unfair criticism with a substantive response, to make sure that you convey that you realize you could make a mistake. And you are therefore disclosing impartial information to support your actions. Unfair criticisms, I'm sure you've experienced this, I certainly have. Unfair criticisms, accusations can cause much pain and damage. But the sad fact is, it's not possible to avoid. It's a fact of human nature. No matter how good you are, it can happen. The only thing that you can control is your response. And for that, Moshe is the best role model. Let me share with you one more piece tonight. This is something that was written by Sivan Rahav Meir. So she writes that she was taking a taxi in Yerushalayim, and her taxi driver told her the following Dvar Torah on this week's Torah portion. So before I go any further, let me just say, that's the kind of story you'll only hear in Yerushalayim, where the taxi driver is telling you a Dvar Torah to the weekly Torah portion. And also, it's a very important thing to remember that we should be learning Torah wherever we are. The Talmud is full of references that start out with, so-and-so was walking along the way, and he said to his friend the following idea. The famous verse in Shema, that we are supposed to study the words of the Torah, b'shivtecha b'veisecha, when we're sitting calmly in our homes, uveleftecha b'derech, and when we are traveling on the way. Torah should accompany us wherever we are. So that's just the idea of hearing a Dvar Torah from the taxi driver in Yerushalayim. But here's what he said. He asked the following question. He said, in the book of Bereshis, the beginning of the Torah, Genesis, the Torah dedicates less than 40 psukim, 40 verses to describing the creation of the world. However, when we get to the book of Shmos, the Torah dedicates more than 400 verses to the building of the Mishkan, more than 10 times as much. It seems very strange. Why is the creation of the world given such a short treatment, and the creation of the Mishkan given a treatment that is 10 times its length? Okay, there are a number of answers to that question. I've shared several of them with you before, but here's the answer that Meir Cohen, the taxi driver, shared with Sivan Rahab Meir. Bereshis, the creation of the world, describes what God did. But what God did is not the purpose of the Torah. The Torah's purpose is our actions. What we are supposed to do. What is our purpose as human beings? What we are required to build and create, and what we have to be careful to avoid. The important thing is not to describe what God did, but to describe what we will do. And in that vein, I want to conclude with the following message from Rabbi Chagai London. And it's very, very appropriate to the period that we're going through. In some ways, of course, what we are experiencing now is unprecedented. But in other ways, it is similar to eras and epochs in the past. Rabbi London wrote as follows: the time today is ripe for fear and mysticism. Every few years, society in general and people individually face some sort of palpable danger. Natural disaster, an economic collapse, war, disease. Listen carefully. The means of dealing with that fear is directly determined by the spiritual state that is found in our hearts. Mastery over wild imagining and fears is an essential part of our spiritual development. What we need to be working on as spiritual people, as believing Jews, is not to be overtaken by fear, not to look for magical or mystical solutions. What we need to focus on is what we need to do. What we need to do is to listen carefully to the directives of public health experts and the directives of halachic authorities. We are required, according to Jewish law, according to civil law, to abide by the requirements of self-isolation where it's called for, and for all of us to practice extreme social distancing, washing our hands often. These behaviors, this is what our job is right now. This is what we are supposed to do. And these actions can make a difference. We are required to abide by them. This Shabbos, in the coming time, I urge you, stay at home, listen to the experts, wash your hands, do not attend minyan anywhere, even outside. It is prohibited. But at the same time, find ways to make this time constructive and positive, because if you look for those ways, you will find them. Thank you very much. Have a very holy Shabbos.